Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni, Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Rambat,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
and Chair McCutcheon.
Here. And does anybody have any changes or amendments to the minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion or
Second, Ms. Clark, all those in favor of accepting the minutes? Aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? The minutes have been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first action item under planning matters is a discussion on regarding the proposal for noise analysis services with residential areas along State Route 100, State Route 109, and other major arterial roadways, all wards. Mr. Vunich?
Madam Chair, for the purposes of the recording and just to make sure we've done what we're supposed to do, there are no attendees on tonight's meeting, so there is no one to speak from there. And we did not receive any written comments prior to tonight's meeting to introduce and offer to the committee. So there is no public comment tonight, which I assume you knew and just were kind of saving us a few minutes, but just for the record, we now have made it official. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for making that official.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, as you know, the Department of Planning and Parks has prepared for your consideration tonight a memorandum with a proposal attached to such regarding a sound analysis along State Route 100 and portions of State Route 109. A question may be raised in your minds, why a sound analysis? What we've discovered over time as traffic has increased on the major arterials in the city of Wildwood, we have also seen a corresponding increase in the amount of noise associated with those corridors. The noise has become such an issue in certain locations that the council people as well as city personnel receive calls regarding the matter. Most recently at a Ward 5 meeting, a number of individuals identified the noise associated with traffic on Route 109 and Route 100 as impacting their quality of life, particularly when they are outdoors. Knowing that and previous discussions this committee has had over the last couple of years, the department requested a proposal from Acoustical Associates, which is Dr. Tom Thunder. Dr. Thunder should be familiar to all of you. Dr. Thunder has worked with the city on the aquaculture operation and in February attended the meeting to kind of give detailed input regarding that aquaculture operation. Dr. Thunder just seems to be a great resource. What Dr. Thunder has provided is a program that he would like to implement in the area of Route 100 and Route 109 to basically study the sound gradients from those corridors and the impact that it's having on the surrounding residential areas. A key component of this would be recommendations in how possibly to mitigate those areas that are exceeding what would be considered appropriate decibel levels or noise levels that are such that are impacting the quality of life. So tonight, the department is presenting to you a proposal for $12,500 from Dr. Thunder to complete the steps as described in the proposal that's attached to the memorandum. I believe I may have made an error in the memorandum saying it was $12,000. I'm going to borrow Mr. Cross's new glasses when I'm reading numbers from now on. So from that perspective, it is $12,500. Madam Chair and members of the committee, if there are any questions or comments, Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cruz, and Mr. Cross, and I would be glad to answer them at this time. And thank you.
So you've got Ward 5 here, but it also impacts Ward 1 and Ward 8 as well. I know Canterbury residents have been complaining a lot about noise on Highway 109, 100 as well.
I'll make a correction if the report is forwarded to City Council to include those 2 wards as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments? Ms. Dodwell?
Just real quickly, what is the date range that we're looking at this work being completed?
Given the amount of the contract, it does require City Council authorization. And so that will be presented to City Council this coming Monday. I've written a contract to begin the next day and have given him roughly to mid-May to complete it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were going to get sound studies done while we had schools running and we could understand what kind of bus traffic noise we get and what kind of backup on traffic we might get that would increase that noise during those times of day.
Thank you,
And
ma'am.
Joe, do you know what time of day they're going to measure the sound?
Well, some of the monitoring equipment will be placed outdoors along strategic locations and be there for a 24-hour period. So it'll give us both those high volume times during what I would consider daytime, and then also let us know what it's like at nighttime as well.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, this has been an issue that I've been hearing for several years. I know Mr. Vunich, we dealt with a homeowner in Canterbury several years back that was complaining about noise. You might recall someone who had contacted the city, but it came up in our ward meeting, and I've gotten emails over the last couple of years that I've forwarded to the Wildwood Police at this point, because that's the only venue I know. Mr. Cross has gotten a couple of those copies of those emails, but even from a police perspective, there's not much that they've been able to do because some of the vehicles today are traveling at like a legal speed limit, and they either have these loud mufflers or they're just loud. I'll defer to Teresa. You may know better being in the business, but that's what at least I've heard from the police. So I hope that out of this, we will get some recommendations of maybe improvements that can be done that can be cost efficient, but at the same time help to buffer the noise, and maybe potentially even some recommendations to adjust our sound code to make sure that we are able to enforce things. I would just reiterate, I think weather, is going to be a factor because especially on 100, if the weather is good, that's when they're out cruising. I think the timing is going to be key. Some of the complaints are usually around 9 o'clock at night. The ramp at the eastbound 100 ramp from 109 is usually a good launching point where they kind of, hit it hard and get into 100 there. And that's what the complaints come from Canterbury over there. But I know it's such a sensitive subject that someone noticed this on the agenda and they were like, it doesn't have us on the list. So I wanted to make sure that we are covering that. And I did send a note to Ms. McCutcheon and Mr. Vunich to say, please, let's make sure we're clear that this includes that area there, because it's just so sensitive. So appreciate the support for it. Thank you.
Ms. Clark?
Thanks, Chair. I think that if Dr. Thunder, he's pretty specific in how he addresses things, and he's got on the paper, the Acoustics Associates letter that he's got here, that the fishery was under the ANSI standard S 12.9. And I'm sure that he will be following that also for the Highway 100 noise. Anyway, I'm assuming so. And if that's the case, then all of these things, the other road noises and the ambient road noises and any environmental noises are all taken in consideration in those calculations. So that said, I would hope that we could have the code adjusted by the time this is done so that we can have something to compare it to with certain decibel levels that are acceptable with the corrections for discrete tonal qualities.
Any other comments? Mr. Rambo?
Yeah, real quickly, I assume that we have no baseline sound data of any kind. And so I'm wondering if anyone on here, Mr. Vunich or whomever, has a handle on whether this is just a normal increase in sound due to increased traffic because we have more folks out here, or is it some things that we've done like the roundabouts, or differences in vehicles? Does anybody have any idea where this is, this increased, these increased sound complaints are coming from?
Well, I can tell you that when they put the roundabout in at Pine Grove Loop and 109, that's the first point in time that I was getting complaints about sound. We can't hear you,
Are you
Rob.
still getting complaints, Deborah?
I am. Especially the houses in Kingstown. They're right there by the turn, and especially, I can't remember the kind of brakes. Joe, you can help me on the trucks. It is really causing issues.
The air brakes.
Yes. Rob, were you trying to say something else? You went silent.
Well, I was just, yeah, it wasn't that important. It sounds as though it's just, it's probably a general increase in the amount of traffic, but we also may have caused some of the problems with the roundabouts. And so we owe it to people to fix that part of it. It's not as clear to me that we should do, bend over backwards to correct noise problems from a highway that's been there forever. But to the extent we caused the problem, people deserve relief. That's it. We'll figure it out.
Mr. Cross?
I think I'm off of mute.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Rambo raises a good point, and I'm wondering, I'm not aware of any studies done in the past, and if they were done, it was probably a long time ago. Mr. Vunich could weigh in on that. But when you talk about the roundabouts, I'm wondering, whereas before, if 109 was a straight shot, let's say, and cars were traveling at a speed and they weren't accelerating or decelerating, but if trucks are decelerating to go around that and they're doing the Jake brake effect, which is creating more noise, that's an issue. Or if cars then are accelerating significantly between roundabouts, they go through it and then they floor it to go further, north or south on 109. And I'm wondering if that's contributing to it. Again, it's a real interesting question, Dr. Rambo, that you raised. I don't know what we could do about that. However, the roundabouts are there. So I wonder, Joe Vunich, if you can talk to Dr. Thunder and see if he can take measurements specifically around the roundabouts, where trucks or something are approaching and taking the foot off the accelerator and using the engine to slow down and creating noise, or then if there's a way to tell if there's a significant increase in sound as folks accelerate away from that roundabout. I think that might be good information to know. But again, I don't know what we ultimately could do about that. But that's a darn good question, Dr. Rambo.
I could certainly ask Dr. Thunder to include the area on Route 109 where the new project has been completed between Route 100 and Clayton Road, if we like. There may be some added cost, I don't know, but I can certainly explore that if the committee is inclined. And I will also note that oftentimes increases in noise are premised on the type of pavement surface that's utilized. Oftentimes, when we see replacements or new technology put on pavements, it does, in certain instances, increase the noise level associated with it. And they are coming out with now low sound pavement materials, surprisingly.
Mr. Garantano?
I'll go after Ms. Nye, and I went already, so I want to let her speak, and then I'll make a quick comment.
Ms. Nyan?
You're on mute still.
Okay, sorry. I do think it's a great idea if we could add that roundabout to do the noise study there, especially as we look at 109, at BA and 109, and there's been talk of one at 109 and Clayton, and down at Wild Horse Creek in 109. It's like if that is the issue before, not that we could stop those, I realize, but if there was something we could do moving forward before we make the problem worse, I really think it is important to pin that down if that has anything to do with it.
Thank you. Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a great point that was raised about the roundabouts. I remember hearing the issue of noise on 109. I think it was about 2-3 years ago. Mr. Brown brought it to our Admin Public Works Committee from a resident complaint. And this was down by the Y on 109. So there is a traffic signal there. And it was around the issue of the Jake brakes. But, at the time, we only discussed putting a sign, something about, I think, the noise ordinance or something like that. And the committee at the time felt that that would be just ineffective at the time, the sign. But it does raise a good point. And we have, there's, noise has become a bigger issue. I just had a resident, and I believe I copied Councilmember Dodwell, a resident on Clayton Road that was complaining about sound. And we know it's come up on Old State Road, the Jake brakes in, Ward 6 area as you're going down Old State. That's been an issue that's come up on in the Old State meeting that we had about 2 years ago. So, yeah, I think that it may have to do with some of that acceleration and deceleration. But again, I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I think we'll leave that to the experts to tell us.
Any other comments? And
Yes,
Mr. Rambo?
very quickly. I hope to ensure, and this is probably already going to happen, but we're looking for information on point source sound versus area wide sound. And we're also looking for probably frequency specific, spikes in the noise. And we can then determine whether it's engine braking, motorcycle engines, pavement noise, wind noise, or whatever. So I'm hoping that the study will include some directional characteristics and also some frequency characteristics. Joe, is that your understanding of the way this is supposed to work?
Dr. Rambo, I'm not 100% sure, but I will inquire of Dr. Thunder and make sure that he is aware of your request and if we can add it to the analysis.
Well, it makes sense. I think it makes sense. And I'm not going to dictate his process, but I really think that, we could use that sort of data, and before we try to figure out cost-effective solutions. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Dodwell?
Thank you, Mr. Rambo, for sharing that information and your perspective, because I think it's imperative that we get detailed information and not just assumed information, because I think our residents are going to want more detail than perhaps any of us would even want in some cases. The other question I had was, with the incoming roundabouts on BA and down at Wild Horse, do you think that's going to deter the amount of heavy truck traffic that cuts through? Because essentially they're cutting through instead of having to go up to 270 down and around. I don't know from a traffic study if we've gotten any information in regards to roundabouts reducing the heavy duty haul traffic at all, Joe, or not. So I'm just curious.
Again, I don't have an answer to that, Councilmember Dodwell, but I'm sure Mr. Brown can provide us that background, and I'll ask him if he can help me out on that and get all of you a response.
Mr. Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding that question, Mr. Brown and I did in fact have a conversation with Ryan Piercy of MoDOT about truck traffic on 109 and it related to the noise and so forth. What we were told, and this goes back about 2 months, was that there are no regulations, so there's nothing that prevents trucks using 109. It is a state road and any vehicles can use it. So when we were hoping to be able to perhaps, ban certain trucks, weight, axles, number of axles and so forth, we were told that no, that's an open road, if you will, a state road too. So unless the roundabouts themselves are designed such that an 18-wheeler or something can't go around it, but I don't think we have found that hasn't reduced the traffic, because some of them go right straight through the darn things sometimes. So we've been told that there's no way to limit the trucks on 109.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a state highway. I don't know how you could possibly do that.
That's correct.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
The other
Councilmember- Oh.
comments that I've gotten, and I've made them to you all too, you all have heard this, is, the development of villages of Brightly, with the removal of a lot of trees and plantings and everything. It's just, the sound just travels now from the highway all the way back to the other side of the development. So I don't know if that's something that's going on in some of the other areas. Cambry has some new development within it, so I don't know if that's an impact. Joe, do you know, Garantano?
As far as the development goes, are you asking me?
If the noise has increased since there's been additional homes put in that area?
No, I mean, the feedback I have would be from the south side of 100, and I don't think that I've heard anything or know of any connection to that. I can just say from my personal observation, I mean, I'm not right on 100. I'm a little bit further back on the, what would be, I guess, is it the south side of Manchester Road? And I do notice the traffic, and I assume it's got to be from 100. And I hear it. And in fact, a year ago this time, I sat outside of my deck. It was the quietest I had heard it ever because of, remember, COVID, with things being shut down. And I noticed it, and I said how peaceful it was. And I just think that it's just added for traffic volumes going through. Our city, I think, has grown.
Mr. Bunich?
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Dodwell, I took your question to mean if traffic calming will reduce the, let's say, the amount of truck traffic on the highway. And that's the question I was going to pose to Mr. Brown as our traffic engineer.
That was just my question, if there would
Okay.
be any benefit.
All right, I'll check on it and let y'all know.
Any other comments?
Quick comment here. I don't know if we have any relation or connection with folks that maintain Clarkson Road. I would think it's probably the Clarkson Valley area, but that's a major road with a lot of traffic. And I do notice a significant police presence there as far as, I think trying to manage speed. I wonder if that is related anyway to managing, maybe helping to manage some of the noise too in that area because there's homes right along that road. And I'd be curious if they've had issues and how they've managed to control it. It may be the speed limit being 45. It may be a reason for that as well, to traffic calming, which they also have traffic calming islands along that section of the road. Might be worth a question to see if that comes up there.
What kind of direction are you looking from this committee, Mr. Vunich?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, the department would respectfully request a motion second and vote on forwarding a favorable recommendation to proceed forward with Acoustic Associates.
Do I hear a motion? Mr. Garantano? And Ms. Dodwell seconds the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes.
Thank you.
Our next item of business is under Parks, and it's the review of bids for the proposed pedestrian bridge and the manners at the Meadows of Cherry Hill, Ward 8.
Thank you
Ernie?
again, Madam. Oh, sorry. Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, several years ago, when McBride and Son Homes developed the manners at the Meadows of Cherry Hills, there was money set aside for a pedestrian crossing. The amount of the set aside was approximately $11,000, along with McBride and Son Homes constructing a portion of the trail that would ultimately connect to that pedestrian bridge. The bridge is intended to link the manors at the enclaves to the aforementioned subdivision. The crossing is not substantial, but without the pedestrian bridge, the crossing cannot occur. And with Mr. Newberry sharing his screen, you can see what we're proposing in terms of the trail and then the pedestrian crossing to connect to the existing trail on the east side of the small drainage way. The Department of Planning during the budget process at the end of 2020 set aside $100,000 for the project. That money was approved and was retained in the budget, the capital improvements program component of the budget for this fiscal year. Additionally, the Department of Planning and Parks has taken the site development plan along with the architectural elevations for the pedestrian bridge itself to the appropriate commissions and boards, and each of them have approved it. The bridge will be, I think, attractive. Mr. Newberry has, there you can see it has stone columns, boulder block to kind of anchor it between the channel walls or the banks of the small ephemeral drainage way. And as you can see, it has what we're hoping to would be considered an appropriate aesthetic for the two subdivisions. The Department of Planning initiated the bidding process at the beginning of February with the help of TerraSpec. There is a significant amount of interest just in the bid documents itself, and ultimately the city received 7 proposals. Those 7 proposals are summarized in the memorandum on this particular topic. Many of the proposals were well beyond the budget that had been established for the project by the designer, as well as the Department of Planning and Parks. But 2 came in well below the anticipated budget and allowed for consideration of at least 1 ad alternate. The 2 proposals that were close in terms of cost and within the budget numbers established by the city were from DJM Ecological Services Incorporated and Spalding Constructors. DJM Ecological Services has done projects for the city previously, but not of this nature. And Spalding Contractors is a small construction firm out of the Jefferson City, Missouri area. The department is recommending DJM Ecological Services And the reason for that recommendation is provided in the memorandum. The base bids between the two are very similar, and the department is also recommending add alternate 1, which would add the composite material to the pedestrian deck, and in the opinion of the department, improve its longevity as well as reduce maintenance. The add alternate was also presented to the Architectural Review Board of the city, and they accepted it as well as an option for future consideration if the bidding was favorable. Again, the department believes that with DJM Ecological Services, a locally based company with experience in Wildwood and the resources, I believe, to complete the project in a minimum amount of time, the recommendation, again, is for that particular company. The recommendation will add a couple of $1,000s extra, but in terms of experience, location, again, the department just believes that's the appropriate approach for consideration of this project. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, the department is respectfully requesting an endorsement of one of the two, DJM Ecological Services or Spalding Constructors. And then with that, it would be forwarded on to City Council for consideration and action. Madam Chair, if there are any questions regarding the bidding process, the plans for the pedestrian bridge, or any other items, the department would be glad to try to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Vunich? Katie?
Just real quickly, based upon, is this going before council on Monday if we approve today, Joe?
That was my hope, ma'am. And we've
Okey-doke.
got it tentatively on the agenda.
Okey doke. And then also, when do you propose the start on this?
Well, typically, if all were to go well at City Council, we would have authorization to proceed forward sometime in mid-April. We would probably have to exchange the contract documents, have a pre-construction meeting.
Mhm.
So my hope would be sometime around the early or mid part of May.
Okay, I just wanted to see if we can get this done before fall of 2021 so that people can start using it.
That would be my goal as well, ma'am.
Do I hear a motion? Mr. Garantano? And second is Mr. Flasher. All those in favor?
With the department's recommendation, if Mr. Vunich wanted to have clarity on that, because he did ask the question, we'll go with the department's. That's my motion.
Okay.
That's my second too.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. And our next item of information is further information on the Park and Stormwater Tax Initiative, all wards. Mr. Vunich, is that yours?
Yes, it is, ma'am. Madam Chair and members of the committee, this particular item will draw on the expertise of not only the Department of Planning and Parks, what little it has probably, but more importantly on our interim city administrator, Mr. Cross, as well as our economic development manager, Julian Jacquin. I will also note before beginning the presentation that John Young, the city attorney, has reviewed the memorandum, provided some, I think, especially pertinent comments that were included. So from that perspective, a lot of our leadership here in the city has seen this and have provided comments relative to what's being described within the memorandum itself. I would also note just in this particular instance, this is to generate conversation. It is the first time that everybody is seeing the stool, the funding stool with three legs, so to speak. And also, is seen for all intents and purposes, the approaches that might be available in terms of distribution of the park and stormwater sales tax. And then finally, the prioritization of projects. So I expect a lot of changes. I expect a lot of additions. I expect a lot of input because again, this is a topic that's important to all of us, both here on the Zoom platform, but all of our residents in the city. I think a key point of the memorandum is that viewing the park and stormwater sales tax is the only source for some of the projects that the city needs to complete would be erroneous. As is noted, the department believes there actually are three legs to this particular funding stool. The first is our existing capital improvement sales tax, which typically generates in an average year about $2.2 million. The advantage of that particular sales tax is it is distributed like the pooled sales tax, meaning monies collected throughout the pooled cities and unincorporated county is dispersed back to the city on a population basis. Whereas the parks and stormwater sales tax will be distributed solely on sales within the city of Wildwood's boundaries. The park and stormwater sales tax is an integral part, I believe, of most municipal governments in St. Louis County in terms of funding these types of projects. So that is the second leg of the funding stool. And then finally, for certain projects of a substantial scale or complexity, many communities use bonds and other financing tools to address them for completion. So collectively, there are some sources out there that the city has utilized, the city could utilize to address not only parks, stormwater, but our roads and bridges, our infrastructure, our internet, special projects, etc. Acknowledging that, the department then goes on to basically state that there are three approaches it believes that the city could consider. The first is to allocate all of the capital improvement sales tax to infrastructure, road, bridges, etc., and special projects, and eliminate the park and trail component that has been utilizing it for a number of years. What that would equate to is the majority of stormwater projects, if not funded by financing tools such as bonds or others, would come out of the capital improvement sales tax. The question on your mind may be, how much does that equate to? Well, this year, Parks and Trails has $1 million, the majority of it going to the Manchester Shared Use Path, Manchester Road Shared Use Path. But in certain years, that number has ranged anywhere from $2 to $4 million. Obviously a great deal of money, and certainly could be used for stormwater improvements. What that would do then is allow the parks and stormwater sales tax to be only used for parks, trails, and their maintenance. That amount of money would then not be shared for other projects. State statute restricts such, but again, recognizing that the capital improvement sales tax could be used for stormwater purposes. The next item is that we would hold funding receipts for a bit of time if the parks and stormwater sales tax is approved. The idea would be is to build a reserve so that when projects do start, we have ample funds to complete. There is a table associated with that that for all intents and purposes talks about year one, doing a stormwater project, year two, and that would be planning design. Year two, do planning and design in parks and trail, but construction of the design project for stormwater. And so you can see through a 6-year window, and that was just an arbitrary ending, that a 2-year cycle would be used. Planning, design, and engineering, followed by construction, and it would be applicable both to parks, trails, and stormwater. And then finally, the department talks about just using all sales tax revenues to, for all intents and purposes, guarantee any of the bonds that are issued, certificates of appropriateness, etc. For certain types of financing tools, there has to be a guarantee. Many communities use property tax revenues. The city of Wildwood does not have that. So a sales tax could be part of that guarantee process. Finally, the department then identifies the projects. Under Parks and Trails, it identified 3 phases of Village Green. That priority comes from our city council, who has set aside money for that project in past years. Then Portner Park, and then the trail extension from Green Pines Park to Town Center. In terms of stormwater, it talks of the rear yard areas of Evergreen Forest subdivision, the drainage way at Wildwood Meadows Estates and Strecker Road, the triple meander, the detention areas near Anniversary Park, and then Bonham Creek at Community Park and Pond Athletic Association. Also with stormwater, it identifies that regardless of year, we should always be looking at opportunities to retrofit existing detention and retention basins and to proceed forward, obviously, with our stormwater master plan. Again, these are suggestions. These are items that have been identified over the course of several years. This is the first time I believe they've been put on paper for consideration. And so tonight, I think Mr. Cross, Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cruz, and I are seeking all of your input so we can make this a better document and address any concerns you have at this time. Thank you.
Comments? Mr. Rambo?
Yeah, there was a lot of innovative, creative thought put into this document, and I think you guys did a great job, a really good job. There's a lot of work to be done in the long-term planning process concerning the specific decisions and so forth on which projects are going to get priority and whatnot. But it seems very solid to me. I particularly like the division of the income monies, the tax being for the proposed sales tax being for parks only is a great way to add clarity to the process for the public. And the way you moved money around so that nobody gets shorted it was just a really great job. So I can't say enough good about it. I'm waiting to see what shakes out the rest of this conversation and the conversations in council. But I'm ready to support something that looks really close to this. So that's it. Good job, guys.
Ms. Dodwell?
Let me echo the same thing. This is the most clear definition of funding sources with projects that I think is much more malleable and informative for all of our residents. I think just these 2 charts alone that outline the funding sources and then how you're going to use said funding sources for the different projects across which years, that tells the public specifically if they have to go into a poll and vote for this come fall, that they know where the money's going to be spent and what projects are going to benefit from them and what the long-term goal is for the city in these areas. So I just want to echo what Councilmember Rambo had just said, that with all of my time on council, this is probably the clearest document I've seen that I think the public will be able to relate to much better than some of the other items that we've provided in the past. Now, on that question, can we provide a document such as this with these charts in it to inform the public on how the money is going to be appropriated? I don't know the answer to that question. I will have to check with legal, or perhaps Julian may know whether or not that can be published publicly, or Mr. Cross or Mr. Vunich.
Would one of you three would like to respond?
Well, I think my preference would be the city attorney advising on such matters, but I would defer to Mr. Cross or Mr. Jacqueline.
Mr. Cross?
Thank you. First of all, let's make it perfectly clear. Mr. Vunich is the author of this document, and all the credit and all the comments that you've made are solely attributed to Mr. Vunich. So he is the author, and I agree. We got to review it. It's always easier to review and edit someone else's work. And so Mr. Young and I did that. But no, Mr. Vunich is the author of this and did a great job. With regards to the question about now, and again, this is one committee. We also have this committee called the Watershed Erosion Task Force. That may have some different opinions in terms of how this money is sliced and diced, but at least this is something on paper to discuss. With regards to going out and educating the public with regards to a park and stormwater sales tax, the document in itself, we are allowed as a city to provide information. We cannot promote that. So we could probably use parts of this. We may not be able to use all of it, but we certainly would be able to provide, should that tax pass, how we would spend it. That is perfectly legal and encouraged. Obviously, I mean, we have a subcommittee of the WETF, and so that's the kind of thing they're working on, and that Mr. Vunich and I discussed when we talked to the representatives from Creve Coeur, who most recently passed a parks and stormwater sales tax. So we can use this, but we have to be very, very cautious and don't cross that line where we're actually trying to as council members and as staff promote it. So we can use a good portion of these documents just explaining to the public what we would do and how we would spend the money, because they need to know that.
Ms. Nyad?
I just have a question. I'm assuming that the department feels that by taking the stormwater projects off of a possible ballot issue and simply making it parks and trails, that it would be easier for the public to understand and also maybe more supported by the public. But just because, parks is more of a glitzy kind of thing than erosion. And they can appreciate that they use the parks or whatever way, or maybe they don't get as excited about the erosion. My question is, one of the groups that was, I guess, volunteering to go support this, which we definitely need volunteers and support out there, was the erosion task force. Do you think that will defer from the support of it if it's funded in a different way? Will they still help in that promoting it? I mean, I know no one knows that answer. I'm just throwing that out there and asking if that could be a concern.
Councilmember Nyan, I would hope that if presented correctly and truthfully, that the allocation of just the parks and stormwater sales tax to park and trail projects will actually end up bringing more money to stormwater erosion control than if we tried to split it. Again, I would emphasize that over the years, through the capital improvement program, the Department of Planning and Parks, with support of City Council, has spent anywhere from $1 million up to $4 million in any given year on certain projects. And that money now would all be available, so to speak, for stormwater projects. And so in principle, the Watershed Erosion Task Force would see increased funding without the parks and stormwater sales tax. And that's how I would like to explain it. And we can go back and look at budgets for the last 10 years And I think I can show to anyone that would question that we do spend money from capital improvements on parks and trails, and we can transfer that, so to speak, and have a greater impact if we were to do it as described in number 1 in the memorandum. So
So-
the surprise, more money for them.
Ms. Clark, I'll get to you in a second. I just want to follow up on Ms. Naeem's comment. So I'm a little confused. So the tax that we're going to propose, is it still going to be called Parks and Stormwater Tax? And if that's the case, then how can we not use the tax that comes in for stormwater, but only use it for parks? Can you explain that?
Well, my recollection from the 2008 ballot, we made it clear on the ballot that this was just for park purposes, not necessarily stormwater. And so that's and the city council would do this regardless. We'll promote the tax honestly and truthfully, and that will make everyone should understand that we aren't negating or ignoring stormwater. We're just doing what we believe is the best approach to fund both at levels that each need.
But it would be called a Parks and Stormwater Tax, correct?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Cross.
Mr. Cross?
Yes, that language is in Missouri law. So that is what the tax is called, and we cannot rename it something else. It is a parks and stormwater tax. So, but as Mr. Vunich just discussed, it's all in the education. And, you know, there's going to be a lot more discussion about how we present that to the voters in November. Which is right around the corner, by the way. And that concerns me that we, you know, it's getting awfully close to be able, and we have to have this ballot language done end of September. So we have some work to do. Obviously, Dr. Remy and his task force is going to be quite involved in terms of how we word that. Because there are going to be voters that are interested in the parks component of this, but there's going to be voters that are interested in the watershed component of this tax. And if there is no discussion about that, potentially there could be some lost voters. So there's a lot of discussion to be had with how this is presented to the public, but it will be called a parks and stormwater sales tax.
I concur with you, Mr. Cross, on your last statement there, that we have to make it very clear that this is both stormwater and parks, even if we reallocate funding internally to complete some parks and some other things. I think the public, we've got strong groups that are adamant that we do something about the stormwater. We also have those same people saying, why do we need any more parks? So if we only allow it to be parks, we might lose those voters. If we commit to a plan for stormwater going forward, as is outlined here, then I think we can get the buy-in from multiple groups. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Cross, but have the flexibility to each fiscal year, after we get down this road a little bit, make an assessment of, does more funding need to go to sewer and erosion control versus going to parks, or does more money need to go to parks so that we can improve or update our park system? Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It's my understanding exactly what you just described, that each year as the city, we can decide, you know, because that money will be coming in, you know, each and every year. And we are not obligated to, we can explain And this is all part of the education so that we, the language be such, we're not locked into anything other than we're going to do these kind of components, but we want to word it so that we have the flexibility that in a particular year we devote more to parks perhaps, and another year more to watershed projects. So yes, ma'am, we have that flexibility.
Ms. Clark?
Perfect.
Yeah, the presentation of this and educating the city, I think this is a real creative way. You know, I wouldn't have said this, I think, before I heard this presentation from Mr. Runich. But now that I think about it, this really relieves one of my biggest concerns about educating the public about what we're going to use this for. And that is, we're putting sort of a negative light on the city by saying, oh, look at our terrible erosion. And I would hate for that to be what people think of when they think of Wildwood, is the negative part, especially for our economic development. We don't want people to look at it and say, oh, I don't want to start my business there because look at all of the erosion problems or the problems they have there. But putting the light on improving the parks and making a betterment of the city and taking something that's good and making it wonderful, I think that's that might help our cause a lot, now that I think of that. And I appreciate this document also.
Any other comments? Mr. Garantano?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make a couple comments here. This is good. This is actually what I've been asking for, or at least what I hopefully was conveying in the erosion task force, something that lays out a multi-year plan. I think that when looking at this, I really like the, where is it over here? If I have to express a preference, the kind of the hold initial option there, just because I kind of show how it balances out between the parks and the stormwater and alternating years. And the reason I say that is because if we want something like this to be successful from a resident approval perspective, because remember, it's not up to us, it's up to the residents. I think we have to present something that's going to have the broadest appeal to our city. And there are residents that have no impact with erosion or stormwater. They do not have any issues, and it's not a priority for them. And they may not even travel those roads that could be potentially impacted by erosion in the future. And so I've always thought that the park and the stormwater components are a good balance between the two, right? We're trying to serve the needs of a broader resident population. I think that looking at this, I would even suggest, if it's possible, instead of year 6, see if we can shoot to go a 10-year plan, show what we can do over 10 years. I think a 10-year plan would be something at least nice to show, because if we're showing too short of a period, maybe the question then is, well, why don't you just, do a bond, pay for it, and be done and over with it? And I think that there's going to be a lot more work. And so, my suggestion, I don't know how the others feel here, but maybe a 10-year plan would be good. So it looks like you only have to add 4 more years to this. And I think in that section there, just looking at it, let's see. Year 6 shows that the only work taking place would be in the parks and trail side. But I do think there's a lot more in stormwater. So maybe that's something that needs to be added in there. And then I guess the other thing too is that we can't forget too that we've got another major priority for the city, which is the internet. And that is going to be probably something that we're going to have to figure out how to pay for. So let's not forget that. That's another one we have to deal with. So that's all I've got.
Any other comments?
Yeah, just real quickly. It's important for us all to remember that this is sales tax is partly for parks improvements, but it's not for acquisitions. Just to be clear, businesses that are interested in relocating here don't think about our erosion. They think about high-speed internet, as Joe just suggested. But I also wanted to correct Mr. Vunich again. It's pronounced Pertner and not Portner, and I'm going to keep hammering everybody until we get till we say my family name the way it's supposed to be pronounced. That's it. Thanks.
Ms. Dodwell?
First, I'd like to be able to turn my mute off. Secondly, I'd like to make a motion that we move this forward to City Council and do it as quickly as possible.
And Mr. Rambo, you're seconding that motion?
Second, yeah, I'm seconding it.
I do have a question, and maybe I'll direct it to Mr. Vunich, but it might be a question we all might need to think about. And so we are coming forward with this here from the Planning and Parks Committee, and I don't know where the erosion will come up, where they will land with this, but I guess at some point there has to be a reconciliation or a harmonization. We all have to be on the same page, right? Because if erosion has a different view of it and they say, well, no, we should have, and I'm just making this up, but 80% of the money needs to go to erosion. And this committee here is saying, look, no, we want a more balanced approach, let's say. I think at some point there has to be some work to try to bring, the groups together to get on the same page and align. Otherwise, there will be a different point of view. And so that's just something I'm thinking about that I think we're going to have to figure out and how to deal with at some point. Is that what you think, Mr. Vunich, is going to have to happen? Some kind of harmonization between the two committees?
Well, to the committee members, I'm surprised that you want to move it forward. I was expecting much more just in terms of, I might have missed the mark on several of these items. So I appreciate that. But what I would like to ask the maker of the motion is, could we delay that forwarding to City Council to the meeting on April 12th? The reason I ask is the Watershed Erosion Task Force will meet next week, and I'd like to present this to them, incorporate their comments from their review, and then bring to City Council a complete document that hopefully, as Mr. Garitano has suggested, is reconciled between the two parties.
That would be fine. And then I had one other suggestion that might be more agreeable to the Watershed Committee if we're going to do a 10-year rollout plan, that on the parks and trails side, that we specifically say, rather than new construction on years 7, 8, and 9, that will be for on-site improvements or of existing structures or parks. Do you follow what I'm trying to say here? I don't know the correct terminology, but that would show that we're slowing down on the parks, new park builds, but we are also allowing Watershed to either perhaps have a little bit more, but we won't know that for sure until we at least get through 5 years of a plan like this, how we would divide that money, and we would have to review it annually. But I'm fine with letting it go through the Watershed Erosion Task Force and then bringing it back to us in April. So I'll
Ms.
pull back
Dodwell,
my motion.
you're withdrawing your motion? Is that
I'll
correct?
withdraw it, but we'll have to find out if the seconder will withdraw as well.
Exactly.
So my understanding of the motion was that we move it forward as soon as possible. And I'm on the erosion task force as well. I sort of saw this as a potential problem, but the advantages, once you understand the concept, seem to be pretty darn significant. And so I wasn't anticipating a major barrier And that was the basis for my seconding the motion, was just the assumption that we would go through the effort of tweaking this document before we send it to council. So I'm happy to withdraw, but the motion that Member Dodwell made wasn't the one that I was seconding, as it turned out. So consider it rescinded.
Ms. Clark?
Yeah, Mr. Vonich, do you think that we need to know, before we go to the Watershed Erosion Task Force, approximately how much money can be diverted over to the Watershed Erosion Task Force? Because saying that it's a significant amount might mean something different to different people. And if we have sort of a ballpark figure, it would be easier to vote on that, whether it goes forward or not.
Yes, ma'am. As I say, I think we can pull the budgets together for the last 10 years and show the expenditure for parks and trails. And that'll give a good indicator to anyone, including those on the Watershed Erosion Task Force, about what I believe will be a greater amount of funding each year for stormwater than would be if we split or somehow allocated on alternate years the parks and stormwater sales tax.
Mr. Cross?
Thank you. Just a couple comments real quick. Number one, we'll be discussing strategic planning phase 3 on Monday night, and we'll be getting into funding and some of the other issues. So internet, as Mr. Garetano pointed out, is number 1. Watershed is number 3. Parks was a little bit further down of the 8 top priorities per the vote of the council. So I think the document that Mr. Vunich has put together is a great document to have the same discussion 1 week from now or so with the Watershed Erosion Task Force, and to get their comments in terms of how they see if they were to agree with this. Personally, I'm expecting a little more pushback, just the way I'm reading the tea leaves, but that remains to be seen. That's just an opinion, and that's just one person's opinion. But I think we need to see how that flies with them, and then we'll also, see how that dovetails into our strategic planning process in terms of funding these projects, be it watershed or internet or anything. And that's for you all to talk about. We have another 2-hour work session coming up on Monday, so we'll be talking a lot about these kinds of things. So none of us really kind of know where the task force is going to land with regards to this kind of document and laying it out. So I think it's too soon. I would think that taking it to council, there isn't anything council can do at this point, because we have 2 different committees that are looking at this from different perspectives, it seems.
So can we make sure to highlight the dollar amounts both ways? In other words, here's our best guess of how much will accrue to erosion control measures if we allocate 100% of the revenue from the parks and stormwater sales tax to parks, and backfill with other sources of revenue. And then here's how much the erosion tasks would probably get if we decided to split it, even if it were 70-30 instead of 50-50 or something like that. I think that kind of puts a fine enough point on it that it'll be a pretty easy decision.
Glad to do that, sir.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Vunich, for putting the document together. I think it's an excellent document. I think it's extremely helpful moving us forward. Our next item of consideration is the consideration of connecting trail in between Glencoe City Park and the Al Foster Memorial Trailhead, Ward 6.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, as you know, at the start of the fiscal year 2021, the department brought a series of smaller projects that it would like to try to complete over the next few years. One of those projects was to create a connecting walkway between Glencoe City Park and Al Foster Memorial Trailhead that does not exist at this time. There are pieces of a pedestrian network between the two, but in most instances, it requires the individual to cross the main street, Washington Grand Avenues, at least twice, if not more. And from that perspective, always causes some concerns for the Department of Planning and Parks. The department has a concept plan developed for this purpose. And if Mr. Newberry would mind sharing his screen. So on the left-hand side of the display, that is Glencoe City Park. There we have an existing pedestrian network as well as the playground area, what I would consider in the southeast quadrant of the park. The intent would be to build this walkway from that particular area, which is an activity node, through the property that's been acquired by the city, some of which most recently by SEMA funds for flood buyout, to 3rd Street, make a crossing at 3rd Street, and then go to the Al Foster Memorial Trailhead and its main shelter area. The department provided a cost estimate, excuse me, for this particular project. Pardon me for a second. My apologies. That estimate was just under $95,000. The department would attempt to construct this through a grant process. The department does not want to expend any capital improvement program funds other than maybe a small percentage for matching purposes, but would hope to basically submit this to Great Rivers Greenway or other public entities to see if they would be willing to grant fund this. And so tonight the department is seeking comments on the design, and then if the design is acceptable, authorization to engage those agencies and see if funding can be allocated from them for the construction of this walkway. Madam Chair, the department's available for any questions or comments.
Would anybody like to make a comment? Mr. Rambo?
Well, yeah, I support the proposal. I don't have any other observations. I don't know, is it appropriate to make a motion to send this forward? I'm gun shy now that I, stepped in at once already.
Actually, if you would not mind a motion endorsing the preliminary design and authorizing the department to engage these public agencies for funding, it would appreciate it. And then I'll do the best I can over the next couple of months to see what we can get.
Absolutely. Then what he said.
So I hear a second. Mr. Flasher? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes.
Thank you.
So let's see. The next two items, update on virtual recreation programs and events, and update report and facility reservations, event registrations, and ongoing and long-term maintenance costs for the parks and trails are generally information items. Does anybody have any question or information that they would like to request from the department? Then we are going to go ahead and move to other matters for consideration. Mr. Cross emailed me this afternoon and asked that we have a discussion on changing the starting times for the committee meeting. Mr. Cross?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, and some of you have been on the other committees where we've had a similar discussion This discussion started with the admin and PW committee to see, and I was tasked with reaching out with the chairs of each of the committees to discuss potential ways that we might be able to help achieve a better work-life balance for the staff. But there's also another benefit because it also impacts you all as council members and those volunteers on the committees. So we've been looking at each committee to see if there was an opportunity to perhaps start the meeting earlier, so it didn't run so late into the night. In the case of the Planning and Zoning Committee, we just voted, or the committee last evening voted to reduce the meetings from 2 meetings a month to 1 meeting a month starting in April. So it's an attempt to maybe see if we can run the meetings, maybe be more efficient, start them earlier, and so forth. So we've been successful on several of them. Ms. McCutcheon did email me back and indicated that it would be pretty difficult given Ms. McCutcheon's work hours and the drive time and so forth. So the staff is fine. We will do whatever you all want, and we will be there to support the committee and be there as long as you need us. So it's not it's nothing that's hard and fast. It's just a suggestion that by committee, if there's a chance to start earlier, that's great for everybody. So that was my ask, if you will, when I just reached out to Ms. McCutcheon to see if that was something that you all would want to discuss. But anyway.
Well, I'm only one person, so on the committee.
You're the chair, however.
But my other thought was, and this is coming up, it's come up in the past about committee start times. Because I know when I first was on council, I think they were at 7 o'clock or so. But it's also for citizen input. I mean, we have a lot of citizens who work and don't get home until after 6 o'clock or whatever. And if they want to participate in committee meetings, then if we're starting at 5:30, it's next to impossible for them to do that. So that was my other concern regarding an earlier start time. Ms. Nyad?
I just have a question, and maybe I've missed it somewhere along the way, but has there been any discussion going forward when we can meet in person? Is that the plan? Are we going to continue to Zoom? Will that affect people's start time as far as if they have to physically get somewhere, or if they're working from home or working somewhere closer to home? Are we going to continue on Zoom, or a mix of, or I didn't know. I don't know if that's been decided or even talked about.
Ms. Nyan, it has certainly been talked about. Nothing has been decided. I will, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I can say that I know his feeling is to be able to have in-person meetings as soon as possible. Certainly council meetings, coffee with the mayor and those kinds of things. However, there's a remote participation policy that is in admin PW that's being discussed in terms of how we do that. We are looking, I mean, literally right now, trying to figure out, because the mayor talked to me after the day after the last council meeting, and there were some audio problems. So the mayor has asked if we can go back to live stream starting this Monday, but there'll also be a Zoom component as well. And so we're trying to figure out the logistics of how to do that. It would seem, given comments that have been made to me by council members and others, that there would always be a Zoom component to some of these meetings, because it really, there's a great benefit to doing these Zoom meetings. But again, it'll be up to each of the committees to decide if they want to continue Zoom. And I don't think it's a one size fits all, quite honestly. So it is kind of still up in the air how we're going to handle it going forward. And again, it'll be up to the chairs to say, if they want to do Zoom, because it works real good for, very well for a lot of people to be able to do it by Zoom as opposed to trying to drive to get to a meeting. So kind of still up in the air, but definitely is being discussed.
Mr. Garantano, and then I have Katie second on the list.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that we have this remote policy that we need to finalize it. It needs to happen so that we do have flexibility. And it has to be a policy that we can apply for both council meetings and committee meetings, because we have revisited this topic regarding remote participation, but there is no policy. So we need to get this addressed so that when we do transition back to a normal state outside of an emergency, then we will have the policy that offers flexibility. And the feedback has been great because it does offer citizens opportunity to participate remotely. And, I think to address maybe the concern that Ms. McCutcheon said about citizen participation, having the ability, I think, to take public comment, in the beginning. I know some committees even do it at the end as well, or both. The T-Cut was good about that. They took a comment at the beginning and end of meetings. So it was a good way to make sure you can get that if you can't get it in the beginning.
So, Mr. Garantano, is that policy coming out of your committee? Is it ready to come out? Where do we stand?
It has been on the agenda, I believe. I'd have to check to see, but I think we are trying to work through that. It was done in alignment with the policy regarding meeting start times, because I know that was a concern for some council members, that if there was going to be earlier meetings, the ability to remote participation would cover their concern. So more to come on that.
Ms. Dodwell?
I'd like to make a motion to change our time till 6 p.m. instead of 6:30 p.m.
Can we make a motion on that? I don't know that this is on the agenda or not.
I don't know, whatever we're trying to do here. Do we-
It was a matter for consideration.
Okay,
So I can't think of any Robert's Rules of Order that would permit us from voting. Steve, do you know? You have any input?
No, I really don't know. If other matters for consideration is kind of a catch-all, and you all know way more about this than I do, but
How about it? Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
How about we just provide you with input? You as chair can set the time
mhm.
as you do with the agenda. So you want to take the input and then make that decision. Maybe that's fair. Sorry to cut you off, Mr. Cross.
no. I mean, a simple, maybe a show of hands or a vote to give Ms. McCutcheon an idea of what the committee is thinking, I think that's a good idea.
So Ms. Dodwell proposed 6 o'clock. How many committee members would like to start the meeting at 6 o'clock?
You can start at 6.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that correct? Mr. Flasher, you didn't raise your hand. Mr. Rambo didn't raise your hand.
I'm fine with any time, and I didn't want to weigh in on 6 because it could be earlier as far as I'm concerned, but I saw your email and I know you have a constraint, so whatever works out, I have no opinion.
I'm the same as Dr. Rambo there. I have no opinion really as far as it goes.
Okay. So we've got four members who would like to change the time until 6 o'clock, correct? Okay. So thank you for your input. We can do, well, let me find out where Robert's Rules of Order stands. And then we can, if we don't need to have a vote on it, then we can just go ahead and announce time, start time. And if we do, then we can take a vote at next committee meeting. Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
Ms. McCutcheon, would you
Yes.
like for me to reach out to Mr. Young? I'll be speaking to him in the morning about some other matters, and I can certainly ask him and talk to him about this issue and get back to you if you'd like.
Yes, please. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am, will do.
Does anybody else have anything under other matters that they'd like to bring up? Mr. Bunich?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I want to apologize to Mr. Jacquin. I forgot to acknowledge him when I was speaking on a couple of the issues. He's in the bottom of my screen, so I guess I don't look down. My apologies, though.
You're good, Jeff.
Mr. Jacquin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not. Thank you, though.
So do we have any residents that have joined us during our discussion? No. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Ms. Dodwell and Ms. Nyan seconds the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for a very productive meeting.
Good job, everybody. See you
See you
later.
later.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Sleep tight, everybody.